This is Matthew Cratter from Trader University, and today I have some of the most exciting news that we've seen in quite some time. The country of El Salvador is actually moving to the Bitcoin standard. We've talked about the gold standard and the Bitcoin standard. It's now actually happening with a real country. I always see in my YouTube comments, Bitcoin can never become real money because it's too volatile, and so it can't be used in an economy, and governments hate it. Well, it turns out that that is not an impediment for El Salvador. The president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but is in the process of introducing a bill that will adopt Bitcoin as legal tender in El Salvador. And as I understand it, President Bukele controls the legislative assembly. So this is almost certain to become law. And it's very important to notice that they're going to be doing two things. They're going to recognize Bitcoin as legal tender and also put it on the government balance sheet. This is absolutely huge. It's important to recognize as well that this is happening with Bitcoin. It's not happening to XRP, the new global standard, as they used to call it, or Dogecoin, or some of the forks of Bitcoin, or Ethereum. This is happening with Bitcoin, not with XRP. Now, just yesterday we talked about how the US dollar system is in the process of crumbling and how Russia and China have been trying to bypass the US dollar in their commodity trade. Russia dumping the US dollar from its sovereign wealth fund, its oil fund, which we talked about yesterday. Well, I believe this El Salvador news needs to be seen in this context of countries moving away from the dollar to Bitcoin. A lot of people don't realize, if you're outside of El Salvador, that the official currency of El Salvador has been the US dollar since, I believe, 2001, and it's now being replaced with Bitcoin. Just in yesterday's video, we were talking about how the first country to buy Bitcoin gives itself a huge advantage, and how that there's this game theory of competition surrounding Bitcoin adoption, whether you're a corporation or a country or a central bank, that the first mover has a huge advantage. And when that happens, it starts to trigger a whole arms race. Russia and China may already own Bitcoin. Perhaps even the US government owns Bitcoin, but it doesn't make sense to make an announcement while you're still in the process of accumulation. El Salvador, obviously a much, much smaller country, and has decided to go public with this. This news came out at the Miami Bitcoin conference just last night. If you're finding this video helpful, I just ask you to hit that subscribe and like button, and maybe share the video with a few friends. Here's the front page of the Diario newspaper announcing that Bitcoin is going to become legal tender in El Salvador. President Bukele has even added laser eyes to his Twitter profile, which is pretty funny. Probably the first world leader to do that. Now, a lot of people are reporting that Bitcoin, that El Salvador will be the first country in which Bitcoin becomes legal tender. It's not actually true. I believe Japan recognized Bitcoin as legal tender back in 2016. There may be a couple other countries, but Japan is the only one that I could find. So El Salvador will be the second country to adopt or recognize Bitcoin as legal tender, and they will be moving completely to Bitcoin, it looks like, unlike Japan, which obviously still has the yen. The other key difference is that they will be adding it to their government balance sheet. They'll actually be buying Bitcoin and putting it on their balance sheet, which is just unbelievable news. In a tweet storm, the president talked about how if just 1% of Bitcoin gets reinvested back into El Salvador, that would increase GDP by 25%. This is why people adopt Bitcoin. They adopt it not because they have a gun at their head, but because of the economic incentives behind it. The president points out on the other side, Bitcoin will have 10 million potential new users and the fastest growing way to transfer remittances. Now, we've already covered Jack Mallers and his Strike company, which Strike basically uses the Bitcoin Lightning Network to move fiat around the world. So if you want to send some money to, in the form of remittances to El Salvador, maybe back to your relatives there, you basically can now use Strike, and it will convert your US dollars quickly into Bitcoin and then send it anywhere in the world, including El Salvador. Jack Mallers, in the announcement last night, says that this is the shot heard around the world for Bitcoin, using the obvious American Revolution analogy, and also points out that it's not just Bitcoin is not just a reserve asset, as we've been talking about, but it also is a superior monetary network. The people who talk about how Bitcoin is too slow and only produces a block every 10 minutes have clearly not noticed the Lightning Network, which is built on top of layer 1, which is the soundest money in the world. Jack Mallers goes on to point out how sound Bitcoin is and how it's a way to protect developing economies from the potential shocks of fiat currency inflation. Now, as we mentioned, Bukele's party has control over the Legislative Assembly, so this bill will almost certainly become law. This is a fait accompli. 20% of El Salvador's GDP is remittances, mostly sent from the U.S. So this is obviously huge, and it's a great way of bypassing companies like Western Union, which charge just outrageous fees to the poorest of the poor in order to send money. So this is a big move forward, not just for Bitcoiners, but for the population of El Salvador. We talked about Jack Mallers' strike. If you want to dig a little bit deeper into that, I have a video which I will link to below, comparing how remittances currently work to how they are working under strike and the Lightning Network. Now, I know some listeners will respond, but El Salvador is a tiny, corrupt country. I don't think most people in most countries have the right to throw stones like this. You tell me where you live, and I'll tell you whether you have the right to criticize another country for corruption. If you're American and you're criticizing the El Salvador for being corrupt, you really should take another look at Washington, D.C. The U.S. War machine and the U.S. Political presence all around the world, and including all of, obviously, the internal and domestic corruption, really means that we should be careful about casting stones. Now, the president of El Salvador, I'm not going to say he's done everything perfect. I don't follow the country extremely closely, but I do know that the U.S. has been meddling in El Salvador politics for at least 50 years. El Salvador has not been meddling in U.S. politics. El Salvador is a very small, as I said, very, very poor country where 70% of the population is unbanked. So where have all the do-gooders been from Goldman Sachs and Wells Fargo and J.P. Morgan, all these centimillionaires and billionaires who supposedly really care for the poor? This is why Bitcoin is spreading, especially in developing economies, because Wall Street doesn't care about them, rather just exploits them using companies like Western Union and other remittance companies. Now, another thing a lot of people don't realize is that by moving to the U.S. dollar as their official currency in 2001, this was one solution to having a very weak domestic currency that was highly inflationary. U.S. dollar was obviously stronger and more stable, especially back in 2001 before we started quantitative easing and all the money printing and all the terrible policies that followed in the wake of the great financial crisis. But by moving to dollarization, it's called, or adopting the U.S. dollar, El Salvador puts itself under the control of the Federal Reserve, the U.S. central bank, and its monetary policy. So if the Fed wants to print a lot of dollars and devalue the currency, El Salvador has to suffer from this. Likewise, at various points when the Fed has tightened, raised interest rates, and tried to tighten monetary policy, it blows up developing countries around the world. So this is one problem with the U.S. dollar standard. It's very difficult for countries that can't print their own U.S. dollars as the U.S. can to function, and it really does make them subject to U.S. central bankers, which doesn't seem fair at all. Sound money is a human right, whether you live in a wealthy economy like in the U.S. or whether you live in a very poor economy, whether it's Zimbabwe or El Salvador or Venezuela or any of these other countries. No one voted to be enslaved by central bankers. We're suffering under them in the U.S., and people in countries like El Salvador have been suffering even more. So this is very good news for the people of El Salvador. It's also very good news for Bitcoiners, and this is what I want to close. Caitlin Long has a wonderful tweet storm here talking about all the legal implications. What will basically happen if this goes through, and it will almost certainly go through since the president controls the legislative assembly. If this goes through, then Bitcoin will get status as money and will have to be treated as a foreign currency by banks. This could also lead to it getting the cash accounting treatment under US GAAP accounting regulations. We'll see if this happens or whether it doesn't. Either way, if it does happen, this would mean that Bitcoin under U.S. commercial law, and Caitlin provides a link here to Cornell Law School, money means a medium of exchange currently authorized or adopted by a domestic or foreign government. If El Salvador recognizes Bitcoin as legal tender, then it would become money under U.S. commercial law. And this would also mean that it would gain status in banking systems globally. It would have to be treated as any other foreign currency, and as such, it may actually get back to our favorable treatment under Basel III banking capital requirements. What hasn't been pointed out to, as well, is that this might mean that the tax law in the U.S. eventually gets changed. Right now, you pay, if you hold Bitcoin for the long term for more than a year, you end up paying long-term capital gains tax. But if Bitcoin begins to be treated as money by Basel, or by the global banking system, at this point it's become very difficult to say that it should be taxed as a commodity or as property, as the IRS has ruled in the U.S. And so there's a decent chance that this snowballs and we'll eventually be able to spend our Bitcoin without owing any taxes. When you spend money, you don't get taxed on it. And likewise, if Bitcoin is an official currency, you should not have to pay taxes on it, which would be just an enormous windfall for everyone and would really mitigate some of the risks of borrowing against your Bitcoin holdings in the form of a loan, a fiat loan. So I would conclude by just saying Bitcoin is already won. We know where this is headed, and everything is converging around Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the new Schelling point for money. Bitcoin has already won. The world just doesn't know it yet. And when I typed this, I was really reminded of the William Gibson quote, "The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed." If you found this video helpful, be sure to hit that subscribe and like button. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.